In the last video, we covered how to enable inputs and assign those inputs to Boolean variables. So now let's look at how we can actually use those variables to trigger specific events within the movement of the crane. So first thing is I'm going to zoom in on this initial two nodes. If you remember from before, the event tick will execute every frame. What we want is the crane to use this event tick to listen for any change that's happening in our Boolean variables. If you remember that we set up to detect if it's moving up, forward, back, down, left, right. So what we're using here is a sequence. And what this does is essentially every frame it will run through and essentially check if it's moving up or down. And then as soon as it checks that, yes or no, it will run through this one and check if it's moving forward or back and left and right. And every frame it does all three of these in sequence. And this is just a good way of kind of controlling the order of operations within your blueprints. So within this one specifically, you can see that I have these two is up and is down Boolean variables here, along with these branches. Now, branches just listen for this condition, true or false. Depending on what this variable reads, it will either execute through the true command or through the false chain. So in this case, if isUp is true, we want it to run a custom event to move up. And the way this works is if you just right-click in the open and type add custom, you'll see that there's an add custom event. Now, this happens at the beginning, right? So this is something that would be triggered automatically. Let's go ahead and set this to something that we can remember the name of. We'll just call it move crane for now. Now from this branch, let's say I want to trigger this move crane on a true condition for this branch. I drag off, and once this custom event exists, then we can call it. So call function move crane. And now we've created a custom event and a trigger for that event. So let's go ahead and rewire this properly. I just wanted to cover quickly how you go about making these. And essentially, remember the event tick is running through. It's checking if it's up and checking if it's down. And at any point, if it's false for both of these, it will just do nothing. It gets to this point and stops and runs through the next chain of events. But if either one of these is true, it will trigger that event, and then we'll jump over to the corresponding event. So in this case, when move up gets triggered, it checks this branch. And essentially, this is just listening to figure out if the clamp is less than or equal to the specific height that we want. This just makes sure that the clamp doesn't run through the ground or move down through whatever limit that we want. You could create this as a variable, so it's something you could set. In this case, I found that 200 units is about the height of the crane container when it's sitting on the ground. So as long as that's true, it will continue to allow it to move up. And how it's moving is it's just simply adding a local offset. So we have this target, which is the clamp, and then its delta location, which is essentially this move. I'm calling it move z speed, but essentially this is just the amount of units that it's moving every time that this runs through, which is every tick. And then it's multiplied by this get world delta seconds, which compensates for variations in frame rate. So it will seem like it moves the same speed whether your computer is running it fast or slow. And that's essentially how each of these works. So move up, move down, forward and back. I took a little bit of a different route with this. Essentially, I just made it so that if it's not moving forward, then it's moving back. But essentially, it's the same thing, just a little bit more roundabout way of handling it. And then finally, I just wanted to cover this last little bit, which is when that little grab collider that we have, when that overlaps something, essentially it just attaches that something to the component. So in this case, when it overlaps the container, it checks the socket name and makes sure that the object that it is has a socket named container grab. And if that's true, then it sets the location and snaps it to the target. So that's just, in a nutshell, how this is taking basic keyboard inputs and converting them into custom events that trigger when you press up, down, left, right to make this container interactive.